He was born not into greatness, but into uncertainty. On January 8, 1942, in the quiet English city of Oxford, a child arrived during a world at war. Air raid sirens echoed across Britain, cities burned, and the future felt fragile. The child was named Stephen William Hawking, a name that would one day become synonymous with the universe itself. His parents were intellectuals, but not wealthy. Books filled the home more than comforts did. Dinner conversations drifted from politics to science, from history to curiosity. Yet Stephen did not stand out as a prodigy. In fact, by many accounts, he seemed unremarkable. His grades were average. His teachers did not predict brilliance. His classmates gave him a nickname that bordered on irony, Einstein, because he was clever, but disorganized, distant, and often lost in thought. What Stephen had, though, was something harder to measure. He asked questions that lingered. Why did the universe exist at all? Why did it begin? And did it have an end? As a teenager, Stephen built crude computers out of spare parts and scrap materials, not because he was told to, but because he wanted to understand how systems worked. He was less interested in memorization than in meaning. Facts bored him. Ideas consumed him. At Oxford University, where he enrolled at just 17 years old, Stephen studied physics. Still, he did not appear destined for legend. He procrastinated, he crammed, he relied on intuition more than discipline, but intuition was his secret weapon. While others followed formulas, Stephen followed concepts. He didn't just solve equations, he imagined them. After graduating, he moved to Cambridge to study cosmology, the science of the universe itself. It was there, in his early 20s, that his life took a sudden and devastating turn. Stephen began to stumble. At first it was subtle. A fall while skating, a slurred word, a clumsy hand. Doctors ran tests, then delivered the verdict with clinical detachment. Amyotrophic lateral sclerosis, or ALS, a degenerative motor neuron disease. No cure, no treatment. A life expectancy of 2 years. Stephen was 21. The diagnosis shattered him. He withdrew. He stopped working. He stopped caring. Why continue thinking about the universe, he wondered, when his own life was collapsing inward? Time, once an abstract concept, had become his enemy. But despair does not last forever when curiosity is stronger than fear. 2 things changed everything. First, Stephen met Jane Wilde, a language student whose warmth and determination contrasted sharply with his collapsing body. She believed in him fiercely, sometimes more than he believed in himself. Second, Stephen realized something profound. He was going to die, but not today. If time was limited, then it mattered. If the future was uncertain, then the present was priceless. He returned to his work with urgency, driven not by ambition, but by clarity. Every idea mattered now. Every insight was a race against silence. And as his body weakened, his mind sharpened. Stephen turned his focus to one of the greatest mysteries in science, the origin of the universe. At the time, many believed the universe had no true beginning. Stephen challenged that assumption. Using Einstein's theory of general relativity, he showed that space and time themselves could have started at a singular point, a beginning of everything. It was a radical idea, and it was correct. As the disease progressed, Stephen lost the ability to walk, then to write, then eventually to speak. But he refused to lose the ability to think. He adapted. He collaborated. He learned to compress entire universes into thought alone. His wheelchair became an extension of his presence, his silence an amplifier for his ideas. By the late 1960s, doctors had been proven wrong. Stephen Hawking was still alive, still working, still rewriting the laws of the cosmos, and he was only just beginning. In the next chapter of his life, Stephen would turn his attention to the darkest objects in the universe, black holes, and discover that even they were not as eternal as once believed. This was not the story of a man overcoming disability. It was the story of a mind that refused to be contained by time, space, or a failing body. By the early 1970s, Stephen Hawking was living on borrowed time. His body continued to fail him, muscle by muscle, nerve by nerve. Each year brought new limitations. Tasks once effortless now required assistance. Speech became slower. Movement became deliberate. But while his physical world shrank, his intellectual universe expanded without limit. Stephen had turned his attention to the most extreme objects known to science: black holes. At the time, black holes were considered cosmic prisons, regions of space so dense, so powerful, that nothing could escape them. Not light, not matter, not information. They were the ultimate dead ends of the universe. Most physicists accepted this idea as final. Stephen did not. He approached black holes the way he approached everything else, not as static objects, but as dynamic systems. He asked questions no one else thought to ask. What happened at their edges? What did quantum mechanics, the strange physics of the very small, say about these giants of gravity? What he discovered would change physics forever. In 1974, Stephen proposed something radical. Black holes were not truly black. Using quantum theory, he showed that black holes should emit a faint form of energy, radiation, slowly losing mass over time. Given enough time, they would evaporate entirely. Even the darkest objects in the universe were not eternal. This idea stunned the scientific community. It directly challenged decades of accepted belief. It forced physicists to confront a contradiction between gravity and quantum mechanics, two theories that worked perfectly on their own, but resisted unification. The phenomenon would come to be known as Hawking radiation. Stephen had done something extraordinary. From a wheelchair, with a failing body, he had reshaped our understanding of reality itself. But as his ideas spread, his condition worsened. In 1985, while traveling abroad, Stephen contracted a severe infection. Doctors performed an emergency tracheotomy to save his life. The procedure succeeded, but at a cost. Stephen lost the ability to speak entirely. For a time, he was silent. Friends feared the worst. Without speech, without writing, how could he continue? How could he teach? How could he think aloud, argue, challenge, collaborate? Then technology intervened. With the help of engineers and caregivers, Stephen began using a speech-generating computer. At first, he typed slowly, selecting words letter by letter. Over time, the system improved. Eventually, he could speak again, not with his own voice, but with a synthesized one that would become instantly recognizable around the world. It was not his voice, but it became his symbol. Through that mechanical tone, Stephen returned to lectures, debates, and public life. He refused to retreat from the world. If anything, he stepped further into it. In 1988, Stephen did something unexpected. He wrote a book, not for scientists, but for everyone. A Brief History of Time was an attempt to explain the universe, its origins, its structure, its fate, without equations, without technical barriers, without requiring a degree in physics. Publishers were skeptical. They warned him that popular science books rarely sold and that complexity scared readers away. They were wrong. The book became an international bestseller. It stayed on lists for years. Millions bought it. Many never finished it, but they tried. And in trying, they encountered ideas once reserved for elite circles: time dilation, the Big Bang, black holes, the nature of reality itself. Stephen Hawking had become a global figure. His image, tilted head, wheelchair, electronic voice, was suddenly everywhere, on television, in documentaries, in classrooms. He appeared not as a figure of pity, but of authority. a living reminder that intellect could transcend physical limitation. But fame did not soften him. Stephen remained sharp, witty, and unapologetically curious. He debated colleagues relentlessly. He challenged assumptions. He pursued one goal above all others, finding a single theory that could explain the entire universe, a theory of everything. It was an ambition as vast as space itself. As the 1990s drew to a close, Stephen stood at the intersection of science and culture. He was no longer just a physicist. He was a symbol of resilience, of intellect, of humanity's desire to understand where we came from and where we are going. Yet questions remained unanswered. What happens to information inside a black hole? Is the universe finite or infinite? And can science explain not just how the universe works, but why it exists at all? In the final chapter of his life, Stephen Hawking would confront these questions, while also turning his attention toward humanity's future and its survival among the stars. As the new millennium arrived, Stephen Hawking had already lived far beyond every medical expectation. Decades earlier, doctors had given him 2 years. Now, more than 40 years later, he was still thinking about the future, not just of the universe, but of humanity itself. His body was almost entirely paralyzed. Communication was slow and deliberate, each sentence constructed word by word. Yet his thoughts ranged further than ever before. While others focused on what was possible in the present, Stephen focused on what might be necessary for survival. He believed humanity stood at a crossroads. Climate change, nuclear weapons, artificial intelligence, overpopulation. Stephen spoke openly about these risks, not as a pessimist, but as a realist. Intelligence, he argued, was humanity's greatest asset, and its greatest danger if left unchecked. He warned that Earth might not remain habitable forever. If humanity wished to survive in the long term, it would need to become a spacefaring species. These were not science fiction fantasies to Stephen. They were calculations, probabilities, long-term equations measured not in years, but in centuries. He advocated for space exploration, planetary colonization, and continued scientific advancement, not for glory, but for preservation. At the same time, Stephen continued his work on the deepest questions of physics. He revisited black holes, information paradoxes, and the nature of time itself. Late in life, he proposed new ways of thinking about event horizons, the invisible boundaries surrounding black holes, suggesting that information might not be lost after all, but subtly encoded at their edges. Even near the end, Stephen was still revising his own ideas, still questioning himself, still willing to be wrong. Beyond science, Stephen became part of global culture. He appeared in television shows, delivered speeches across continents, and collaborated with scientists, artists, and thinkers from every background. His presence was unmistakable. His synthesized voice, once a necessity, became iconic. But behind the public figure was a man who understood his own mortality. Stephen spoke often about death, not with fear, but with acceptance. He saw it as a natural conclusion, not a cosmic injustice. The universe did not owe permanence to anyone. Meaning, he believed, came from understanding, curiosity, and wonder, not from duration. On March 14, 2018, Stephen Hawking died peacefully in his home in Cambridge, England. He was 76 years old. The date itself carried symbolism. March 14th, Pi Day, the mathematical constant that appears throughout the universe. It was as if the cosmos had quietly acknowledged one of its greatest interpreters. Tributes poured in from around the world. Scientists, leaders, students, and ordinary people reflected on what Stephen had given them. Not just discoveries, but permission to ask questions, to challenge assumptions, to believe that understanding the universe was not reserved for the few. Stephen Hawking left behind equations that reshaped physics. He left behind books that invited millions into the conversation. And he left behind an idea more powerful than any theory: that the human mind, even when confined by the most severe limitations, can still explore infinity. That curiosity is stronger than fear, and that our place in the universe is not defined by how small we are, but by how deeply we seek to understand it. Stephen once said that we are just an advanced breed of monkeys on a minor planet of a very average star. But he also believed that we could transcend that origin through knowledge, through science, through imagination. The universe began with a question, and through minds like Stephen Hawking's, it continues to search for answers.